We are ready to begin. There's one visual aid that I've got to bring out. I was going to wear this in across the room, but I decided I might fall over the microphone cable. This is important. This week, one of my friends came to visit. He's a part of our class, and we had a conversation for 2.5 hours on world affairs and current events. And one of the things he said was, "We need to take the sack off of our head." Is that a visual aid? I have horses, draft horses, my son and I, and they have blinders. And so, he says, remove the blinders. Pull your head out of the sand. What other statements are there that help us to conceive the idea of arousing ourselves and becoming alert? Any more you can think of?
Wake up.
Wake up. Okay, so we've got these different concepts. Take the sack off your head will be the theme for this evening's lesson. We're going to show a variety of pictures. Some of these will be disturbing. Some of this information you've never heard before. And you will say, well, and you don't want to hear it maybe ever again. I will do the very best I can to present the truth. And even if it hurts, we need to see it once in a while. So we'll try to intersperse it with some happy thoughts so that it's not all the truth part that makes you feel uneasy. We'll bring in some beautiful concepts also. Let's see what we can start with here. The Price of Ignorance is the name of our evening's lesson. From the old Deluder Satan Act to No Child Left Behind. We're going to try and cover a bit of history here. The old Deluder Satan Act of 1647 was one where these good people decided that they had to read. Now, John Idemo covered that quite well in his presentation. They needed to learn to read so that they could learn the principles in the Bible and apply them in their lives. And so they started right out with effort to organize reading programs for youth. We talked a week or two ago about the 3 great dangers that can destroy us from within. The flattery of prominent men, and we brought a blacksmith's tool. What was the name of the blacksmith's tool? The flatter. And we found out in 1828, that the word flatter came from the word flatter. And that was the blacksmith's tool. But when applied to human relations, it was smooth talk. And that makes more sense to me, actually, than flatter or flattery. So when we talk about the flattery of prominent men, we're talking about smooth talk, false educational ideas, and sexual impurity. And often the prominent men that are smooth-talking you are also involved in the other two. We learned about Adam Weishaupt and some of the things that he did. He was a contemporary of George Washington. Adam Weishaupt was the religion professor at Ingolstadt University in Bavaria. And in fact, he was the head of the Department of Religion. And as the head of the department, he started a secret society unrelated to the department in which he had 3 goals. To overturn the Christian religion. That was one of his goals. He was the professor of the religion department, teaching religion. He's going to overturn the Christian religion. He's going to do other things that will destroy society, such as overturn the existing government and institute the New World Order, or the Great Society, as he called it in his day. Those were his 3 goals. Oh, I didn't realize I had them on the next frame, or I'd have done a better job of reciting them. Destroy the Christian religion, overthrow the existing government, and rule the world with the Great Society. Notice the date, May the 1st, 1776. Have you ever heard of May Day? Unwinding the maypole and the celebrations in the socialist countries? Goes back to Adam Weishaupt. On the other hand, our system, as John Idemo so ably pointed out, was built to establish a Christian nation, a nation under God, with liberty and justice for all. Notice 2 things almost the same month, just very close. All things have their opposites. And so as our Heavenly Father established a great free nation and made it possible then to have freedom of religion, Satan was working on establishing just the opposite. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 has this great concept in it. Religion, morality, and knowledge, being necessary to good government, shall forever be encouraged in our schools. These were the foundation concepts that were to be taught in school. The schools in those days, long ago, and this is more like my father's day, he describes the old one-room schoolhouse where all the children went to the same grade. They were neighborhood-centered, parent-directed, and professionally assisted. Richard Pratt, my dad, about 1917. This is my great-grandmother. During this age in his life, he was studying from a book called The McGuffey Reader. Now, none of you are old enough to have taken the McGuffey Reader. If it was an unusual teacher that drew it out when nobody was watching from the ACLU. The McGuffey's readers at that time, there were 120 million in circulation being used in our school systems. This is William Holmes McGuffey. He actually died in 1873, and they carried his book on, and they rewrote it several times. And so when it says McGuffey Reader, he didn't necessarily write the latest version. I have a couple of copies here. We're going to read a story from one in a moment. Saturday Evening Post said of McGuffey's Reader, "For years, McGuffey's system and his books guided the minds of 4/5 of the school children of the nation in their taste for literature, in their morality, in their social development, and next to the Bible, in their religion." Had a great influence on the nation, McGuffey Reader. Now it's time to read a story from it. We're going to go to the second McGuffey Reader. There are 6 in the series, from kindergarten through grade 6, actually 7 books. We're going to read the story of Henry the Bootblack. Now, McGuffey Reader was designed to teach religion, morality, and knowledge. That was its purpose. English, spelling, punctuation, grammar, all of the above. And literature. These things were to be taught through the reading program. See how many character traits of Jesus Christ you can identify as we read through this story. Just a little 2-paragraph story. Henry was a kind, good boy. His father was dead, and his mother was very poor. He had a little sister about 2 years old. He wanted to help his mother, for she could not always earn enough to buy food for her little family. One day a man gave him $1 for finding a pocketbook which he had lost. Henry might have kept all the money, for no one saw him when he found it, but his mother had taught him to be honest and never to keep what did not belong to him. With the $1, he bought a box, 3 brushes, and some blacking. He then went to the corner of the street and said to everyone whose boots did not look nice, "Black your boots, sir, please." He was so polite that gentlemen soon began to notice him and to let him black their boots. The first day he brought home 50 cents, which he gave to his mother to buy food. When he gave her the money, she said as she dropped a tear of joy, "You are a dear good boy, Henry. I did not know how I could earn enough to buy bread, but now I think we can manage to get along quite well." Now, can you use that story to teach the English language? Punctuation, spelling, grammar, religion, morality, and knowledge, all contained. How many character traits of Christ? I know it'd be difficult to pick them all up as you're going. Did anybody count on your fingers as we went through? 10. There are 10 character traits of Jesus Christ contained in this one short story. You can open to any story in McGuffey and find the same quality. A wide variety of things. If you go to the 6th McGuffey Reader, you better have a college education because it's on that level. The 6th McGuffey Reader has the same kinds of things you would read in a college class. A nation under God. We've talked about the foundation of a free nation, recognition and worship of a Creator. The Creator made all things. The Creator has revealed a moral code of behavior for happy living that distinguishes right from wrong. The Creator holds mankind responsible for the way they treat each other. All mankind live beyond this life. In the next life, mankind are judged for their conduct in this one. These we consider to be the principles of sound religion. The American religion. These we read last week, and they're contained, among other places, in the Creed of Benjamin Franklin. So it's summed up in brief form here. Our Constitution is based on a foundation of the laws of nature and of nature's God, creation, and morality. This is my school teacher when I was in the 2nd grade. At least it reminds me. It's a Norman Rockwell painting, but it reminds me of Miss Frisky. That was her name, Miss Frisky. She was everything that this woman represents here, in the gray flannel skirt and the little slender beanpole lady that I remember so dearly in the 2nd grade. These were the days when in my school in the state of Kashmir, Washington State, they handed out the Bible. And they had Bible reading after school for anyone that wanted to stay. There was a kind, gentle lady that would tell the stories of Jesus to any students that so desired to stay after school. And I was one of them. And I remember how important my own little book was. It was the first book I ever owned that I can remember. And it was this little hand edition of this pocket-sized Bible. Now, Satan deceives nations. He goes about deceiving entire nations. Oh, I mean, it's good to deceive a few people, but if he can get the whole nation to follow his program, that's a grand slam. The Humanist Manifesto of 1933 and then revised in 1973, among other individuals who participated in the creation of this document, was John Dewey. Now, why do we have John Dewey in an evening on education? What's his relationship to education? Some people call him the father of progressive education. He's given great credit for having a profound influence on today's schools. Well, these are the basic beliefs of John Dewey and other godless people who built the American education system as we know it today. Here's the foundation belief coming from the book that I showed you in the previous screen. These concepts are quotes from the Humanist Manifesto of 1933. We find insufficient evidence for belief in the existence of the supernatural. As non-theists, we begin with man, not God. No deity will save us. We must save ourselves. Religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. The human species is an emergence from natural evolutionary forces. Ethics is autonomous and situational and stem from self-interest. Favor right to birth control, abortion, divorce, and choice of sex direction. We believe in maximum individual autonomy, reject all religious, moral codes that suppress freedom, demand civil liberties, including right to oppose government policies, right to die with dignity, euthanasia, and suicide. We have reached a turning point in human history where the best often is to transcend the limits of national sovereignty and move toward the building of a world community, the peaceful adjudication of differences by international courts. Now, that's the summary of some of the key points of the Humanist Manifesto created by the father of progressive education, along with many other prominent Americans. Summed up on the left, we have a society with a foundation of atheism, evolution, amorality, and at the top on the globe we have a socialist one-world view. Well, we got this character back again. We recognize him. I tried to put his name in there, but it just disappeared. I don't know where it went technically. Karl Marx. Now, I'm going to caution you now to relax now. Don't get upset about Karl Marx. I could tell last time this was causing some stress. Karl Marx wrote a document called the Communist Manifesto. Prominent leaders that you love and respect, gray-haired old men, said that the Communist Manifesto was the counterfeit of the gospel plan. a counterfeit plan. There were 10 points in the Communist Manifesto. One of those points was, the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto reads, free education for all children in public schools. We have had so many years, like 150 years, of public education, and it's our tradition that we have a hard time even conceiving that there's any other possibility. Isn't that true? You just think there's no other way. We must agree with Karl Marx on this one point. Isn't that the case? We must agree with him. I mean, there isn't any other possibility. What would we do in all these, what if, all these poor children out there that wouldn't get educated, what if the teachers didn't have a license? They might teach false doctrine, or whatever your what if might be. Try to, just calm down and think this through now. This is one of the tentacles that Karl Marx wants to wind around you and draw you into, and the more you're drawn in by this tentacle, and I'm using that word from previous great men that I love and respect, and so do you, the tentacle, if you let it pull you in, will eventually cut you off by degrees from the Spirit of God. Now, Utah Territory, 1870s. Did we have any schools when we first came over the mountain and down into the valley? Right at the beginning, when the wagons rolled in, did we have any schools? Well, I doubt it. I'm sure it didn't take them long until they started organizing. I don't know, the same afternoon perhaps. I don't know that technical of history here. But we did have a territorial governor who was very outspoken on this. And he said, this is the ending of a long statement. He's responding to an editorial in the Salt Lake Tribune. He says, would I encourage free schools by taxation? Exclamation mark. No! Oh, well, what would he encourage? Now, he was one of numerous leaders of that time who said this is not the way to do it. Now, he didn't mention Karl Marx. He just simply said Karl Marx's program isn't the way to do it. Here was another one I found interesting. When it became apparent, let's pause for a moment, though. You all know the story of Samuel in the Old Testament, where Samuel was the prophet leader of the people, and the people came to him and they said, we want another kind of government. You remember that story? Give us a king so we can be like all the other nations. Now you remember that, don't you? Okay, give us a king. So here we had in Utah in the 1870s the masses of the people saying, we want public education, free public schools so we can be like all the other states. And the people were so overbearing that they just wrote over what their leaders taught them and ignored it, and they started the public school system. Now you can go back and do your own reading on this. It's very interesting history. John Taylor, who was very outspoken in support of Brigham Young, said, well, if they're going to do that, I will run for superintendent of the territorial schools, and perhaps we can launch this in a better manner. And so he ran and won as the superintendent of the territorial schools. John Taylor, an outspoken opponent of public education. Bit of our history, Utah history. Oops, I think we want one beyond. Just try the button there. This is a very interesting book. Is Public Education Necessary? Now, open your ears that ye may hear, and your hearts that ye may understand. Be humble and open-minded about this now. We're not asking anybody to change anything. We just want you to contemplate our history. What happened? Consider the thought. A majority of our nation has been deceived into accepting an element of the counterfeit plan, and they cry out, give us free public education so that we can be like all the other nations. Just contemplate. Maybe that's true. Maybe Satan did deceive our nation, and maybe we did embrace one of Karl Marx's programs. And maybe that program is causing great stress and corruption among our youth and adults alike. Generation after generation after generation. Just ponder on that. This is the symbol that one gray-haired old man likened the tentacles to, the octopus, and one of those is education. From McGuffey we went to Macmillan. And we have a vivid example here when you remember the beauty of Henry the Bootblack. From 1810 to 1950, things changed quickly. In 1810, 16 out of 25 pages contained moral content in the children's readers. This is the school textbooks. By 1830, it had changed slightly. It went up, in fact. 1850, it was starting then to drop off. 1870, notice what's happening then. When Utah was setting up public education, the content had already dropped down to 6 pages out of 25. Get the right number there. 6 pages out of 25. That's not very many, but that's still, they're getting some moral values taught in the schools. And by 1930, 10 years before I was born, it was down to 1 page containing moral content out of 25. And by the time I went to school, it was virtually 0. Oh, huh? You mean the moral content was removed? All religious and moral content was systematically removed by men like John Dewey, that kind of person, who wanted to use the schools as a vehicle as they were taught by men like Adam Weishaupt. They wanted to use the schools as a vehicle for social change. And they were successfully doing it by gradually, like the tortoise with the dragon's head, by gradually progressing into this just a little at a time.
Steve, I wished I would have brought something. My daughter, last night, I was helping her with a history, and they're studying Jesus. The history book brought that in, and it's perfectly legal to use the Bible as a history text, and so they are.
I've been reading about that. Yes, there's some interesting approaches. Very limited, but there are some people doing some good things.
Well, when she first read me the question, she wanted help, and I said, what?
Now, you're not able, they won't pick you up, so we're not going to let you talk very long because I'm trying to make this. But you're right on target. There are some things that good people can do. That's what she's pointing out. Good people have done something. This is an example of what we received when we went from McGuffey to Macmillan. The right names there, the books here. This, a few years ago, was a Utah Reader. Probably not now because they keep changing. That's another story. Throwing away the books and starting with new books. My sister's a librarian. She brings me new books all the time. She says they're just taking these to DI. Brand new books. Some of them never been opened. They bought them last year. They go to DI this year. This is another story for another time. Okay? We're going to read this Rachel the Bird, and you can open any story in here. You'll get the same quality. This is the quality. Rachel had planned her party since last Friday. Her friends arrived early. She greeted each one with a broad smile. She received her presents at the door. She liked the African plant her best friend gave her. Then they all sat down. Rachel's father was going to entertain them. He did magic tricks. He forced a rabbit to stand up. Then he made Rachel's mother float in the air. She was level with the top of the table. She remained in the air a whole minute. Everyone had a good time. How'd that one make you feel? May I ask the question, by what power did the father raise the mother off the table and suspend her in the air? Is that a legitimate question? What happened was when we went from McGuffey to Macmillan and we abandoned all religious and moral content, we had to replace it with something because we're trying to teach English, grammar, punctuation, spelling. And so we had to put something in. So what did we put in? How would you describe this story in 2 or 3 words? How about nonsense, trivia, witchcraft? Those words fit this story, don't they? You turn 1 or 2 pages and read the story. Here's the one about the little green men. And it's very, useless. Trivia, nonsense, witchcraft, and politics. They pull into several of them. So you're getting politicized as you do the reading experience. Okay, that gives you 2 examples, one from the old days and one from current times. Karl Marx goes to college. Now, this was the heading of a Wall Street Journal article several years ago when I was a full-time researcher and I was reading the Wall Street Journal and other publications, many of them. And that caught my eye. And I read that article. Oh, that was an interesting article. I never forgot it. It's been in my head ever since. Karl Marx goes to college. Many of you thought Karl Marx was dead. He's not. He's alive and well on college campuses today. And then he gets down into how he's effective. He's convinced and directed teachers, it says by the thousands, to embrace the doctrine. And now it says they're openly socialist in the universities. And then it adds, in what class Karl Marx is most effective? United States history. And I've got numerous examples of this. Numerous. Since then I started reviewing history books. And here's one that just came. Now, I am a book nut, if you haven't figured that out yet. This is the one that just came. I haven't even read it. Maybe one line I read. All I had to do is read the introduction. And I said, that book's something we're going to bring to class. Karl Marx went to college. Well, so did David Horowitz. David Horowitz, you remember who he is? He was a left-wing liberal back in the 60s when I was at college in Berkeley. Remember, I went to Berkeley in the 60s. Well, he's the guy that was walking around with the long hair and the floppy no shoes and hadn't had a bath. That was David Horowitz. And hundreds and thousands just like him. They called them hippies in that day. Well, David changed his mind as the years went by. And he became converted to the principles that are closer to the right side instead of the left. And David wrote this book just recently. It's copyrighted in 2006. I mean, it just barely came. I ordered it 6 months ago, and it just arrived because it's brand new. He gives a short biographical sketch of 101 of the most dangerous academics in America, and then says there are thousands more just like them. Karl Marx went to college, and he's still there. And if you read these sketches of these people that are teaching the youth of the nation, you'll soon understand that the goals of Adam Weishaupt to overturn the Christian religion, overturn the existing government, and replace it with the Great Society are the goals of these college professors. Down on the bottom is the most interesting. I know you have a hard time reading it. Right in the center is Weishaupt. These are books. This is the foundation of the system on which our present America is working. Weishaupt and then all of the philosophers left and right from the center figure there. I don't know if he particularly was the worst, but they put him in the middle. I don't know why. I'd put him in the middle too. Bad guy. Anyway, this is the foundation then for the current system of government, and our Constitution, what did it say in this reading we just did, doesn't offer it much of a threat or something like that. It's not threatening the government. They're not using it with other words. The new civil religion is a term I found interesting. This is what happened to the one-room schoolhouse. There's one right up the street there's one in Kanosh, I know it's like this, a little bigger. Closed the doors 30 years ago. Why? Oh, because they said bigger is better. This is bigger and better. Lockport Consolidated School, home of the cavemen, home of the devils. I like the one that's up in Salt Lake, and I'm sorry Sharon Stewart isn't here tonight. She used to teach there. Home of the patriots. They're all homes of public education. Socialism. Which way did we go? What just happened then? Okay, we got to there. We have the comparative figures here then. These are the two contending forces. We saw last week that we're at war. It's a war of words. It's a war of ideology. And ideology is spread by people. And some of those people are powerful, and they run universities. Robert Bork, in his book, Slouching Toward Gomorrah. I used to recommend that. I still do. But everybody that reads it, they get halfway through, and they tell me I'm just halfway. Did anybody finish it? Okay, got one hand back there. Thank you, Eileen. I get another hand here. Robert Bork's book, Slouching Toward Gomorrah, is excellent reading. He just uses a big vocabulary, and we haven't learned that vocabulary. That's because we're in a school system that doesn't work on that kind of vocabulary. In his book, he points out that the apparent hippie movement in the 60s looked like it faded out and went away. That's what we would all think. You know, I finally graduated from college, and by the time I graduated, there were less long-haired people, and more people were taking baths. And then a few years later, when, time goes by, pretty soon we didn't see the hippie movement. And he elaborates on that, Robert Bork does. And he says what happened was they graduated from college and got their graduate degrees, and then they went on to become the professors and the presidents of the universities. And then David Horowitz, he points that out very ably in his brand new book. Now, I'm not over-exaggerating or overemphasizing. I'm just telling you what happened. This is the history of our system as we know it today. Which father are we following? Don't have to wrestle on that question, do we? The National Education Association is one example, and I hope next week to bring a DVD and show 2020. I think it'll be ready. We'll be able to show you inside of a union meeting where school teachers are planning the next event. You won't believe it. You will not believe it. It's in Madison Square Garden just a few weeks ago, and 2020 goes in there with a camera, and they film those school teachers in action. Try not to say any more. Come next week, I think they'll be able to see it. Example of a teachers' union, a Trojan horse in American education. I remember when I first went into teaching. I taught for 6 years in public school. The first day in faculty meeting. Now, I'm a brand new graduate. I've never been to a faculty meeting. This is all new to me. First day in the faculty meeting, they say, Steve, do you want to join the NEA? I said, well, what is it? Oh, it's a way to get cheap insurance. Okay, I'll take it. For the next 6 years, they automatically deducted from my salary my dues to the union. I never even knew it was a union. Until after I moved away, and then my dear old friend Dr. Skousen started teaching me about American school systems. And I learned that I had been paying for the program to pervert American schools. This is an accurate presentation, this political cartoon. Go away, kid, you bother me. Our lecture today will be on contract demands and the science and formation of effective picket lines. Caution, school zone. Now, we're cautioning you for other reasons. This doesn't mean slow down for your car. It should mean that also. There's another reason. We're going to introduce you to two people here. True or false, our kids are learning lies. Oh, this is horrible. Don't say that. Oh, we have wonderful teachers, and we do. We've got many wonderful teachers. And if it wasn't for them, the system would have, I'm not sure what it would have done a long time ago. We have many wonderful teachers. But still, the question is, true or false, our kids are learning lies. Are public school textbooks biased? Are they censored? The answer to both is yes. And the nature of the bias is clear. Religion, traditional family values, and conservative political and economic positions have been reliably excluded from children's textbooks. This is by the same man that did the study, Dr. Paul Vitz, the one showing the relationship of the moral values being removed. These people, I wished I'd met them, probably died of old age by now. Back in the 60s is when this picture was taken. They're just people like you. I don't think there's anybody in here that's a superstar, including myself. We're just people. We just live in little towns in rural Utah, and we enjoy our life. And somebody talked you into coming to a lecture, and they were told it would be American history. But you didn't know perhaps what kind of history. These people right here sent their children to the public school. And one day their boy came home, and he didn't have good eyes. And he needed a bigger print. The book he was using from school had just modest-sized print, and he needed a bigger print. And his assignment was to memorize the Gettysburg Address. Now, that's pretty noble. How many of you memorized the Gettysburg Address when you were in school? I'll give a few hands out there. He was going to memorize the Gettysburg Address. So his mother, Mrs. Gabler, Norma Gabler, she got out the encyclopedia. And she opened the encyclopedia, and she started reading the Gettysburg Address, and she found it was different than the one in his school book. Oh, you mean there are two Gettysburg Addresses? Well, there surely were there. There was the Gettysburg Address in the encyclopedia, and there was the edited version in the school text. Well, what had they done to it? Took out all the references to God. I mean, after all, you know, we can't have that in a public school. So they edited out Abraham Lincoln's references to God. They wrote a book with help of professional writer, Textbooks on Trial. And these are some of the things that are included in their book. Barnyard Morals set of textbooks. Textbooks dominated by filth. Marilyn Monroe gets 6 pages. George Washington's mentioned briefly. These all came back in the 60s when this couple were doing their homework. They, like you can do the same thing. You can go down and you can read and you can find out what your children are learning. That's all they did. They went, and here's some of the things they discovered. True or false? The Pilgrims had no particular religious inclinations. And you can guess what the right answer was for that school. True or false? Moses led the Hebrews not through the Red Sea, but a swamp. Okay, these are the things that Norma and Melvin Gabler, they became famous. They became so famous across the whole nation, people were starting to rewrite textbooks or not put them on the market because they knew they wouldn't sell, because Norma and Melvin Gabler would put their finger on it and say, that book's not quality. They were invited on multiple occasions to speak before the Texas School Board. They were from Texas. And a great influence for good was had by just a common pair of people that didn't have any degrees. They just read school books. True or false? Alexander Solzhenitsyn found Siberia to be a land of opportunities. True or false? Chairman Mao's communes tripled food production by 1958. True or false? Roosevelt's New Deal saved us from the Great Depression. True or false? The right to bear arms is an insignificant guarantee. True or false? The Surgeon General proved that fornication can be healthy. The evolutionary hypothesis of common ancestry was covered in many of them, and they dealt with that quite often. This indeed is the front cover off of Life magazine a few years ago. I picked that one up. That wasn't from the Gablers. I also mentioned this one in the previous lesson. This is out of the local, this probably not used this year, but 10 years ago this was out of the local high school textbook. I particularly found the little box on the left interesting, if I can read it here. Various hominids have existed over the past 4 million years. Today only Homo sapiens remain. Keep in mind that males and females evolved simultaneously. A few years ago I was invited by the publisher of this book. This is still current as I'm told. It's current 4th grade history book in Utah. I was invited by the publisher to preview 2 of their history books. They had heard that I was into that, and I had slammed one of their history books in one of my lectures. That was the one I had slammed. And one of the guests, or one of the participants out of an audience of 400 at Weber State College, came up at the end of the lecture and says, "Why did you say that about the book I sell?" Because it's true. Pretty soon, the publisher asked me to preview the book and give him a written explanation, which I did. I submitted it. After I submitted it on this book, then they asked me to submit it on this book, which I did. I just happened to have that book still. This is one right here. And if we had an hour, I'd go through it with you. Maybe it would take 5 minutes. Then the publisher sent me back a statement that said, a letter, "We would like to include your name in the front of these 2 books as one who has reviewed them for us." I wrote back and said, Well, that's fine as long as you include the changes that I offered. My name is not in the books. Here, for example, this is out of this book right here. This is my I could start anywhere. I'm just going to start right here. War bonds were issued to help the government pay its large war debt. Now, this is a 7th grade history book. What is a student capable of handling in the 7th grade? And that's not too hard. War bonds were being sold. Well, they probably could discuss then what bonds are. At that same time, I'm going to give you some side history now. At that same time, there was leadership in Utah. We mentioned J. Reuben Clark. You know something about David O. McKay and Heber J. Grant. David O. McKay, as I remember, was a professor, a teacher. J. Reuben Clark, a great scholar, one of the greatest. J. Reuben Clark was a renowned lawyer, a renowned statesman. I almost used the dirty word. A renowned statesman. He was the ambassador to Mexico, the undersecretary of state. These men were qualified, fine leaders. They were also the leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I'm sure that the Treasury Department had probably sent letters to the Catholic leadership and the Protestant leadership and to whoever they could try to encourage to buy war bonds. What they wanted these people to do was to go to their congregations and say, support the war. We need to support our troops. Buy war bonds. That's what they wanted them to do. In a long letter, these three men, known as the First Presidency, responded. Now, I wish we had time to read more, but let me just read the 2 lines here. We do not believe that aggression should be carried on in the name and under the false cloak of defense. We therefore look with sorrowing eyes at the present use to which a great part of the funds being raised by taxes and by borrowing is being spent. They grieved over this, and they said that in their letter. This is a war of aggression. You've never heard that before, have you? Oh, we were told this was a war to fight for freedom and to keep democracy alive in the world and to have peace all over the world. This is the war to end all wars and these other nice, puffy things. This was a war of aggression, according to these 3 men. And the bottom line, not a quote, just a summary of the rest of the letter. No, we will not urge our members to buy bonds. Here's another example. Now I've given you the contrast. What the textbook said, they didn't, nothing else. All they said was we should buy bonds. Okay, this is another example. America needs your scrap rubber. And then there's a little caption under the picture that says who is in the picture and that they're collecting scrap rubber. That's all it says. What's the rest of the story? What is the truth, with other words? The truth is, I'm going to sum it up really brief because we're running out of time. Scrap rubber drive was another Roosevelt fiasco. And there's pages and pages of reading on that scrap rubber drive. It was just a big fiasco. FDR to Martin Dies, chairman of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Martin Dies was a great American hero, a great patriot, a good man. And he was trying to sort out who the bad people were in government and try to weed them out, trying to identify the people who were not Americans and not supporters of America. Roosevelt says to him, well, you know, all this business about investigating communists is a serious mistake. Now, we didn't know till after 1995 that there were 329 Soviet agents inside the United States government during World War II. Now, he was the president. The administration was riddled with communists. And we didn't know that clearly until after the Verona papers came out. And so scholarship and historians weren't able to read those until after 1995. You get to how close that is to our time, just a few years ago. We used to say of McCarthy, we heard it said of McCarthy, I never said it. People said of McCarthy, remember Joseph McCarthy? Oh, that bad McCarthy, he's on a witch hunt. He's claiming there's a communist under every bush. That's one of the nasty things they said about him. McCarthy was wrong. He only had 81, as I recall, some number like that. He had identified a little handful of people. He said, these people are either communist or they're communist sympathizers. Well, if the number was 81, he was surely wrong because it was really 329. Well, you know, all this business about investigating communists is a serious mistake. His closest personal advisor was a supporter to the point of treason of the communist cause. His name was Harry Hopkins, and Roosevelt invited him to live in the White House with him. Why don't we hear this anywhere? Why don't we hear the history of America instead of the fluff and the puff that a textbook like this one presents? There's a little more to it here. No later than 1937, and Sumner Wells, who's in the foreground, an intimate advisor to FDR, and his quality of character is another subject for another day. They were working on a blueprint for the League of Nations in 1937. Now think about that. 1937, they were already getting ready for the blueprint for the United Nations. In 1945, we fulfilled that. When should we tell our children the truth? Now this is all fluff and puff. They don't say anything wrong, that's really not factual. They just leave it all out. There's nothing there to help the child to understand the grim nature of that time period. FDR was a victim of his own alphabet soup. He had been poisoned by a recipe which he had created for himself. I wrote this. This is my writing. If you want to criticize it, it's my creation. After reading several volumes, this is the summary. Franklin Roosevelt is known for the numerous unconstitutional bureaucratic agencies which he created, such as OPM, OPA, OFF, OCD, FEPC, and ETC. There's a lot more besides those. What apparently clouded his ability to make wise choices was the pea soup that he created for himself. And the pea soup could be called the 8P soup. The PPPPPPP, which stands for philanderer, perpetual prevaricator, plus power-piling, pompous politician. Why don't they tell us that in the textbooks? That's not overkill. I assure you that is not overkill, what I just stated. All of those things are verified very substantially in history. And yet, what do we read about him? Well, I'll get one more statement here. And this is, again, back to the textbook. When should we tell the children the truth? Then we start quoting the textbook. At the conclusion of the war, the surviving soldiers, sailors, and airmen came home. People tried to put their lives back together, but no one could go back to the days before the war. The war had pulled the United States out of the Great Depression and marked the U.S. as an economic and military superpower. They give Roosevelt the credit for pulling us out of the Great Depression. And that's another evening's discussion to show the rest of the story. This next one I thought was even more interesting. Soon after the war, England's Winston Churchill warned the world that an iron curtain had fallen over Central Europe. The Soviet Union's communistic government began conquering border countries in Eastern Europe. The Soviets wanted to expand communism across the whole world. The people in communist Russia could not work, travel, or rent an apartment without permission from the government. They could not own property or business. They could not choose their own government leaders. These ideas were the opposite of what free nations believed was right. Now, what they didn't tell the rest of the story. At Yalta, Churchill and Roosevelt, who were just named in there, Churchill and Roosevelt sat down and gave Stalin everything he asked for, which included, among other things, 3,000 airplanes from the United States, that's more than, 3,000 tanks, 9,000 jeeps, 16,000 weapon carriers, 41,000 trucks, plus $2 billion worth of additional machinery. And England sent over its fair share. And what did Stalin do with this? Well, he did everything that we just read right back here. He went around conquering and beating up people and plundering and, submitting 700 million more people to his program of government. And he did it with our aid. When should we tell the truth? We're going to close now with a story from McGuffey so we can get over this You know, does anybody feel any tense feelings? Kind of makes you feel tense, doesn't it? Well, let's see. We got that one. We're going to start here next week. This is the United Nations. This year, they'll probably vote on it. They brought it up last year as the Reform the United Nations Act. And Tom DeLay, and I smile now knowing what he just went through, the quality of character, Tom DeLay stood up and urged us to support this movement to reform the United Nations. And we could then fulfill the great goals of the founders of the United Nations. And this was all in last year's debate, and now it'll come up again. So if you really are interested in what the United Nations is, next week we'll tell the rest of the story. Now that's not a good place to end, and so we're going to end back in McGuffey. I'm going to do it like this. We're going to get around to a picture that's just a pretty little sweet engraving. If I can think of how I can make this work now. Okay, I go down here like this. Right there. Okay. You can see that. You know what next week's lesson is. This one right here. Isn't that a relief? This is a wood engraving. And I love to wood engrave. It's a great, great craft, an art form. This is a wood engraving from a story out of the third McGuffey Reader. Now we're going to go back 150 years. And we're going to read a story like children used to read to learn English. Just a few days ago, I was thinking about this lesson. I was thinking about how to prepare for it. And I thought, you know, you can open McGuffey anywhere you want. And I opened up McGuffey just like that, right there. And I've always told people you can open McGuffey anywhere you want and find the same high-quality stories. And I began to read. We Are Seven. That's the name of the story. And this is the picture in the book that goes with the story. I met a little cottage girl. She was 8 years old, she said. Her hair was thick with many a curl that clustered round her head. She had a rustic woodland air, and she was wildly clad. Her eyes were fair and very fair. Her beauty made me glad. Sisters and brothers, little maid, how many may you be? How many? 7 in all, she said, and wondering looked at me. And where are they, I pray you tell? She answered, 7 are we, and 2 of us at Conway dwell, and 2 are gone to sea. 2 of us in the churchyard lie, my sister and my brother, and in the churchyard cottage I dwell near them with my mother. You say that 2 at Conway dwell, and 2 are gone to sea, yet ye are 7. I pray you tell, sweet maid, how this may be. Then did the little maid reply, 7 boys and girls are we. 2 of us in the churchyard lie, beneath the churchyard tree. You run about, my little maid, your limbs they are alive. If 2 are in the churchyard laid, then ye are only 5. Their graves are green, they may be seen, the little maid replied. 12 steps or more from mother's door, and they are side by side. My stockings there I often knit, my kerchief there I hem, and there upon the ground I sit and sing a song to them. And often after sunset, sir, when it is light and fair, I take my little porringer and eat my supper there. The first that died was Sister Jane. In bed she moaning lay, till God released her from her pain, and then she went away. So in the churchyard she was laid, and when the grass was dry, together round her grave we played, my brother John and I. And when the ground was white with snow, and I could run and slide, my brother John was forced to go, and he lies there by her side. How many are you then, said I, if they 2 are in heaven? Quick was the little maid's reply. No, mister. We are 7. But they are dead. Those 2 are dead. Their spirits are in heaven. 'Twas throwing words away, for still the little maid would have her will, and said, Nay, we are 7. Well, I got done with the story. I didn't make it through, because I became so grief-stricken, knowing that this had been robbed from our children. They had been deprived of these beautiful stories that teach the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I say, let's learn the truth. And then let God's Spirit guide us into how to apply it in our families and in our own life. That poem was written by William Wordsworth. I'll probably read it again several times. I love you, good people. Thank you for coming this evening and sharing these thoughts. I know they're heavy and oppressive. Some of the thoughts are not kind thoughts. But God wants us to learn the perplexities of nations and try and sort this out and know the truth so that it can make us free. I so testify in the name of Jesus Christ.